My husband of 42 years sent me a text that changed everything. 7 words. I just inherited millions, pack your things and get out. I was holding his shirt when I read it, still warm from the dryer. He had a mistress. He'd already spent $60,000 on jewelry for her, weeks before that text arrived. He had divorce papers drawn up and a check ready, $10,000 for 42 years of my life. What Robert didn't know, the house was mine. Had been since 2003. His name wasn't even on the deed. My name is Marion Chen. I was 67 years old, and my husband had just made the biggest mistake of his life. Robert came home at 6:30, same time he always did. He walked in, put his keys on the hook, and started pacing the living room like he had somewhere to be. I stood in the kitchen doorway watching him. "Did you get my message?" he said, not a question, a statement. "I got it," I said. "What does that mean, Robert?" He stopped pacing. He had this look on his face. I'd seen that look maybe twice in 42 years, both times right before something bad happened. He crossed his arms and told me his Uncle Lawrence had died. Uncle Lawrence was Robert's father's younger brother. He'd made his money in tech investments back in the 90s. Never married, no kids, lived alone in a big house in Scottsdale, and barely spoke to the family except at Christmas. I'd met him maybe 6 times in 40 years. Robert said Lawrence's lawyer had called that morning. The entire estate, every single dollar, left to Robert. "How much?" I asked. He smiled. Actually smiled. "Multiple millions," he said. "The attorney is still doing the accounting, but it's somewhere around $2.3 million. $2.3 million. I heard the number and I stood there trying to understand why my husband looked like he'd won the lottery and I was supposed to feel like I'd lost something. "That's wonderful," I said carefully. "That's our security, Robert, that's." "It's my money, Marion. Uncle Lawrence left it to me." I didn't respond. Something felt wrong in the room. The air felt different. That should have been my first warning. I ignored it. Robert started acting strange the very next morning. He woke up before me, which he hadn't done in 20 years. By the time I got downstairs, he was already showered and dressed in clothes I didn't recognize. New slacks, a button-down shirt with a pattern. He smelled different too, not his usual drugstore cologne, something expensive. Sharp. "Where are you going?" I asked. "Errands," he said. Then he picked up his phone from the counter, put it in his pocket, and walked out. I stood in the kitchen in my robe and slippers. The coffee maker was beeping. I poured a cup and stood at the window watching his car back out of the driveway. Errands. Robert hadn't run errands by himself in 15 years. I did the shopping. I scheduled the appointments. I organized the house. That was how we worked, how we'd always worked. I told myself it was the excitement. $2.3 million would make anyone act strangely for a few days. I told myself he'd settle down. I told myself that was a lot of money to process. Big mistake. Over the next 2 weeks, Robert went to the gym every single morning. Robert had not set foot in a gym since 2008. He came home with a new haircut, then another new haircut. He bought 3 suits from a store downtown I'd never heard of. He started locking his phone, not setting it face down, not walking away from it, actually locking it with a password and keeping it in his pocket every minute of every day. I asked him about it once. "Who are you texting so much?" He looked at me like I was being ridiculous. "Business stuff, Marion. The estate is complicated. There's a lot of paperwork." I let it go. I don't know why I let it go. Looking back, that was the moment everything changed. The moment I should have started paying attention. But I kept folding his laundry, kept making his dinner, kept living in our house at 1847 Maple Drive like everything was fine because that was what I did. That was what I'd always done. Then came the Thursday that broke everything open. I came home from my book club around 2 in the afternoon. I parked in the driveway and walked in through the front door. The house was quiet. I set my purse on the side table and walked into the kitchen. There were papers on the kitchen table, neat stack, official looking. I walked closer and picked up the top page, petition for dissolution of marriage. Robert Chen, petitioner, Marion Chen, respondent. I set it back down, picked it up again, read the first paragraph, then the second. My eyes kept sliding off the words like they didn't make sense, and that's when I heard footsteps behind me. I turned around. Robert was standing in the doorway to the hall. And next to him was a woman I had never seen before in my life. She was maybe 35, dark hair, perfectly done, designer clothes, a handbag that probably cost more than my first car. She stood there with her hand on Robert's arm like she belonged in my kitchen, like she'd been there 100 times before. Maybe she had been. Robert said her name was Vanessa Cooper. He said it like he was introducing me to a coworker. Casual, matter of fact, like I was supposed to shake her hand. "Marion," he said, "I'd like you to meet Vanessa. She and I have been seeing each other for a while." I don't remember what I said. I don't think I said anything. I looked at Vanessa Cooper standing in my kitchen and I thought about 42 years. I thought about his shirts in the dryer. I thought about the text message. I just inherited millions. "Pack your things and get out." Robert pointed at the papers on the table. He said his attorney had drawn them up. He said it would be easier for everyone if I just signed them and moved on. Then he pulled a check out of his shirt pocket and set it on top of the stack. $10,000. "I want to be fair," he said. "This should help you get started somewhere." Started somewhere? After 42 years in this house. After building a life together from nothing. After every dinner, every holiday, every hard year, every good year. $10,000 to get started somewhere. I looked at the check. I looked at Vanessa. I looked at my husband of 42 years, and something shifted inside me. Not broke, shifted. You want to know the worst part? He looked relieved, like he'd been dreading this conversation and now it was finally done. Like signing those papers was something I'd naturally agree to because that's what Marion would do. Agree, go along, be reasonable. He had no idea who I actually was. And that $10,000 check was just the start. Hit like and subscribe so you don't miss the ending, and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. I picked up the check, folded it once, set it back down on the table. I said I'd need a few days to review the paperwork. Robert nodded. Vanessa said nothing. I walked out of my own kitchen, went upstairs to the bedroom, and closed the door. I sat on the edge of the bed for a long time, then I picked up my phone and called my daughter Jessica. She answered on the second ring. "Mom, what's wrong?" I told her all of it. The text, the papers, the $10,000, the woman standing in my kitchen. Jessica went quiet for a second. Then she said, "Mom, listen to me, do not sign anything. Do you understand? Not a single page." "I know. And there's something else, something I think you need to remember." She reminded me about the house. 1847 Maple Drive. 23 years ago, Robert's mother was going into a nursing home and we were terrified the state would come after our assets. Our attorney at the time had recommended we protect the house, so we transferred the deed. Into my name only. Robert wasn't on it at all. We'd forgotten about it over the years. It was just a thing we'd done a long time ago for practical reasons. But the house wasn't Robert's. It was mine. "Don't say anything to him yet," Jessica said. "I'm going to call someone." That night I sat at the kitchen table alone. Robert and Vanessa had left. I don't know where they went. I didn't ask. I sat there with a cup of tea and looked at those divorce papers. $10,000, $2.3 million in inheritance. 42 years, he thought this was over. He had no idea it was just starting. Jessica called me back the next morning. She'd found an attorney, Rebecca Torres, specialized in divorce and family law, 15 years experience, known for being extremely thorough in high-asset cases. I wrote down the name, made an appointment for that afternoon. I didn't sleep much that night, but when I did sleep, I didn't dream about Robert or Vanessa or the papers on the kitchen table. I dreamed about my house. My house at 1847 Maple Drive, in my name, since 2003. And when I woke up for the first time in 2 weeks, I felt something other than confusion and grief. I felt like I had somewhere to stand. Rebecca Torres had an office downtown, 3rd floor of a building off J Street. I walked in wearing my good coat, the gray one I wore to teach her conferences. I sat down across from her desk and I told her everything. The text, the papers, the $10,000 check, Vanessa Cooper standing in my kitchen. Rebecca listened without writing anything down. Then she asked me one question. "Who holds the deed to the house?" I told her, 1847 Maple Drive, transferred to my name alone in 2003. She asked if I had documentation. I said I believed so, somewhere in our files. She smiled, not a big smile, a careful one. "Mrs. Chen," she said, "your husband made a very large mistake." She explained what that meant. The house was mine, not marital property. Mine. Robert couldn't force me out, couldn't sell it, couldn't include it in a negotiation without my consent. And that was just the beginning. I walked out of her office an hour later with a folder of papers and a list of things to gather: bank statements, tax returns, any financial documents I could find at the house before Robert decided to move them. That should have been my first warning. I needed to move fast. I got home that afternoon and went straight to Robert's filing cabinet in the spare bedroom. He'd always kept it locked, but I knew where the key was. I'd known for 20 years. He kept it taped to the underside of the second drawer on his side of the closet. He thought I didn't know that. Big mistake, on his part, not mine. I pulled the drawer open and started going through folders: tax returns, mortgage documents, bank statements going back years. I photographed everything with my phone. Then I texted the photos to Jessica and asked her to forward them to Rebecca. My hands were steady the whole time. I remember thinking that was strange. My hands should have been shaking. Robert called while I was still in the spare room. I let it go to voicemail. He called again. I didn't answer. He texted. The message said, "I need you to sign those papers, Marion. The attorney says the sooner we do this, the better." The sooner we do this. Like we were scheduling a dentist appointment. I put my phone in my pocket and kept photographing. That evening, Robert came home and found me in the kitchen making dinner. I think he expected me to be gone, or at least upset. Instead, I was standing at the stove making pasta, and the table was set for one. Mine. He stood in the doorway and looked at the table. "We need to talk," he said. "I'm not signing anything," I said. I didn't look up from the stove. He was quiet for a moment. Then he came and stood next to me at the counter, too close, crowding me the way he used to do when he wanted to end an argument by sheer presence. "Marion, be reasonable. You can't live here forever." I turned around and looked at him directly. "Actually, Robert, according to my attorney, this house is in my name alone. Has been since 2003. So yes, I can." He stared at me. First time in days he actually looked at me, really looked. Then he turned around and walked out. That was the last night he slept in our house. Over the next week, things moved fast. Rebecca filed a response to the divorce petition. She also requested full financial disclosure, meaning Robert had to account for every asset, every account, every transaction. And that's when things got really bad. Robert hired Gregory Hartman. He was known around Sacramento as a man who worked for people with money who wanted to keep their money. He was expensive and aggressive. Within 48 hours of Rebecca's filing, Hartman sent a letter arguing that Uncle Lawrence's entire inheritance was Robert's separate property. Nothing to share. Marion Chen was entitled to nothing but whatever the court deemed fair from the marital estate, which, according to Hartman's filing, was minimal. Jessica called me the night that letter arrived. She'd seen it forwarded from Rebecca. "Mom, he's trying to cut you out completely," she said. "I know. Are you okay?" I thought about it. "I'm angry," I said. "That's different from scared." She was quiet a moment. "Good," she said. "Stay angry." You want to know what I was actually angry about? Not the money, not the house, not even Vanessa. I was angry because Robert had looked at 42 years and decided it added up to $10,000. He'd done the math on our entire life together and come up with that number. That's what I was worth to him. That's what kept me going. Rebecca had an idea. She brought in a private investigator named Marcus Webb. Former law enforcement, 20 years in the field, currently working family law and insurance cases. She said he was the best she'd worked with. Thorough, discreet, knew exactly what to look for. I met Marcus once, briefly, in Rebecca's conference room. He shook my hand, asked me a few questions about Robert's recent behavior, took notes, and left. 3 days later, he came back with a report. I sat across from Rebecca while she read it to me. Robert had opened a new private checking account 11 days after Uncle Lawrence's estate was confirmed. The account was in his name only. He'd transferred $340,000 into it from the inheritance settlement within the first 2 weeks. That alone was significant, but Marcus kept going. There was a jewelry purchase. $60,000, a luxury boutique on L Street. Marcus had found the receipt through a source he didn't elaborate on. The purchase was dated 3 weeks after Uncle Lawrence died. 3 weeks. Robert hadn't even finished grieving his uncle before he spent $60,000 on jewelry for a woman he was planning to leave me for. Looking back, that was the moment something clarified in my brain. This wasn't impulsive. This wasn't a man who suddenly got money and made stupid decisions. This had been planned, maybe not the money itself, but Vanessa, the new account, the suits, The gym, this had been building for a long time. I didn't know how long yet, but I was starting to understand. There's more, Rebecca said. Marcus had found Vanessa Cooper's social media accounts. Instagram, mostly public. He'd screenshotted everything before she could make it private. There was a photo of a diamond bracelet. The caption said a little something for being patient. The bracelet looked expensive. Very expensive. And then there was a photo that made my stomach drop. It was a picture of Vanessa in a living room, sitting on a couch, laughing, champagne glass in hand. The photo was tagged 3 weeks prior. The couch in the background was mine. The side table was mine. The lamp in the corner was mine. That was my living room at 1847 Maple Drive. She had been in my house for weeks before Robert handed me those papers, before he stood in front of me and introduced her to my face. She had been sitting on my couch, drinking champagne, in my home. I sat with that for a moment. Then I said, "What do we do with this?" Rebecca said we file an emergency motion. She filed it the next morning. The motion asked the court to immediately address several things. First, Vanessa Cooper had been residing in the marital home, which was solely in my name. Second, Robert had transferred significant marital assets to a private account. Third, given the behavior, an asset freeze was warranted pending the full divorce proceedings. The hearing was set for 10 days out. Robert's attorney filed a counterargument almost immediately. Hartman argued the transfers were legitimate, that Vanessa was a guest and not a resident, and that Marion Chen had abandoned the marital home by choosing to stay elsewhere. I had not abandoned anything. I was still in my house. But the language they used was designed to create a paper trail. That was the moment I understood how serious this was going to get. Jessica drove me to the hearing. She sat in the gallery while I sat at the table with Rebecca. Robert came in with Hartman and sat across the room. He didn't look at me once. Vanessa was not present. Judge Patricia Morrison presided. She was in her 50s, brisk, no nonsense, the kind of woman who'd heard every version of every story and had very little patience for games. Hartman spoke first. He was smooth, confident. He painted Robert as a man trying to responsibly manage a newly inherited estate, a man whose wife had made unreasonable demands, a man simply trying to move on from a marriage that had run its course. He didn't mention the $60,000 in jewelry. He didn't mention the Instagram photos. Rebecca stood up and put 3 documents on the judge's desk. The jewelry receipt, the screenshots of Vanessa's Instagram, a printout of the bank transfer records showing the $340,000 moved to a private account within 2 weeks of the estate being confirmed. Judge Morrison looked at them for a while. Then she looked at Hartman. "Counsel," she said, "your client transferred $340,000 into a private account in the weeks following an inheritance. He made a $60,000 jewelry purchase for a third party. And photographic evidence places that third party in a home solely titled to the respondent. Is that an accurate summary?" Hartman said the inheritance was separate property under California law, and the transfer was a legitimate protective measure. The judge looked at him for another moment. Then she ruled. Robert and Vanessa were to vacate 1847 Maple Drive within 48 hours. All of Robert's accounts were frozen pending full financial disclosure. I was awarded $4,000 per month in temporary spousal support, effective immediately. Robert's face went completely still when she said it. Hartman leaned over and said something to him quietly. Robert didn't respond. I sat very still and let the words settle over me. $4,000 a month. 48 hours to vacate my house. Full financial disclosure. We're talking about $2.3 million, 42 years of my life, and a $60,000 bracelet for a woman who'd been sitting on my couch while I was somewhere else trying to figure out what I'd done wrong. I hadn't done anything wrong. That was becoming clearer every day. We walked out of the courtroom into the afternoon sun. Jessica grabbed my arm. "Mom," she said, "you okay?" I thought about Robert's face when the judge ruled. That stillness, like something had knocked the air out of him. "Yeah," I said, "I'm okay." But I had a feeling Robert wasn't done yet. A man like that, a man with $2.3 million and a lawyer like Hartman, doesn't just accept a ruling and move on. And I was right. I got home that night to a voicemail from a number I didn't recognize, a woman's voice. She said her name was Linda, Robert's sister. We'd never been close. She'd always been on his side of things, always slightly cold to me at family gatherings. I hadn't heard from her in years. "Marion," she said, "I think it's time we talked. There's a settlement on the table. $300,000 cash, no trial, no more court dates, just take the money and move on, for everyone's sake. $300,000, up from $10,000. Progress in a way, but still not 42 years worth. I saved the voicemail and forwarded it to Rebecca. Then I made myself a cup of tea and sat in my living room. My living room, at 1847 Maple Drive. Whatever was coming next, I was ready for it. I called Linda back the next morning. I let it ring 4 times before she picked up. She sounded surprised, like she hadn't expected me to actually call. "Marion," she said, "thank you for getting back to me. 300,000, that's what you're offering. Robert wants this to be fair. He knows this has been hard, he just—" "Linda," I let the name sit there for a second. "He offered me $10,000 last week. Now it's 300,000. What changed?" She was quiet for a second. "He's trying to do right by you." "No," he got scared. "That's different." She started talking again. Something about keeping things civil, about not dragging the family through court, about how this was best for everyone. I let her go for a moment. Then I cut her off. "Tell Robert my attorney will be in touch." And I hung up. That should have felt satisfying. It didn't, not really, because Linda's call told me something important. Robert was rattled. The judge's ruling had hit him harder than he'd expected. He'd thought this would be simple. Convince Marion, get her to sign, walk away clean with $2.3 million and Vanessa on his arm. He hadn't planned for any of this. That was good. But a rattled man with a lot of money and a good attorney is still dangerous. I wasn't forgetting that. Rebecca and I met again that week. She walked me through the full picture of what we were dealing with. She said something I wrote down and kept on my kitchen counter for the rest of the process. "The inheritance doesn't automatically protect him," she said. "California is a community property state. But more importantly, the moment he mixed that inheritance with joint accounts, it stopped being separate property." I asked her to explain. She laid it out simply. Robert had received the inheritance. Then, within the first week, he'd made several transactions through joint accounts, paid a shared bill, moved money in and out, even briefly, even once. The legal term was commingling. Once separate property gets commingled with marital property, it loses its protected status. "He mixed it," I said. "He mixed it," she said. "Robert's big plan had a fatal flaw. And he'd created that flaw himself in the first frantic week of feeling like a rich man." I asked Rebecca how we prove it. She said the bank records would show it. We already had some of them. She needed more. She said Marcus was working on getting a full picture of the transactions. I went home that night and made dinner. Chicken and vegetables. I sat at my kitchen table alone and ate and looked out at the backyard. The garden Robert had said for 15 years he was going to fix up. He never did, I had. Every spring I was out there, planting, pulling weeds, trimming the hedges. Looking back, that said everything. The next week Robert showed up at Jessica's house. I was there for dinner when the doorbell rang. Jessica answered it. I heard her voice go quiet and careful. Then she came into the kitchen and said, "Mom." Robert was standing on the porch. Vanessa was with him. She was wearing a long camel coat. Her hair was perfect. She looked like she'd dressed for this. Robert asked to come inside. Jessica said no. He asked to speak with me directly. I walked to the door and stood in the frame. He said, "Marion, I need you to think about what you're doing. This trial is going to be painful. For everyone. Our kids are going to have to hear things they don't need to hear. Then sign a fair settlement," I said. "The offer is $300,000. "No." He shifted on his feet. He wasn't used to me saying no. In 42 years of marriage, I had said no to him maybe a handful of times. He didn't know how to handle it. Vanessa spoke up. "Marion," first time she'd addressed me directly, her voice was smooth. Practiced. "We're not your enemies. Robert just wants to move forward. Surely you can understand that." I looked at her. She was 35 years old. She'd been in my house. She'd sat on my couch. She'd smiled for photographs holding a bracelet that cost $60,000 while I was across town trying to understand what had happened to my marriage. "Leave my daughter's property," I said. "Now." Robert started to say something else. I stepped back and Jessica closed the door. My hands were shaking then. First time they'd shaken through any of this. I sat down at Jessica's kitchen table. She brought me a glass of water without being asked. She sat down across from me. "You okay?" she asked. "I recorded it," I said. I pulled out my phone and showed her. I'd started the voice memo at the moment I heard Robert's voice through the door. She stared at me. Mom. Rebecca said to document everything. Jessica looked at me for a long moment, then she laughed, just once short. Dad really underestimated you, she said. He really did. I sent the recording to Rebecca. She said it was useful, not because of anything Robert had said exactly, but because of the pattern it showed. The escalation, the visit to our daughter's home, the pressure. It demonstrated that Robert was trying to avoid full financial disclosure at all costs, and here's why that mattered. Remember, we're talking about $2.3 million from an uncle Robert had barely spoken to in decades. Money that had made him a different person overnight. Money that had made him look at 42 years and decide to throw them away for a woman in a camel coat. Rebecca was building a picture, transaction by transaction. Marcus came back with more. The private account Robert had opened now had a balance of $127,000. Beyond the initial $340,000 transfer, there had been additional expenditures. The jewelry, dinners, a hotel suite in San Francisco, 3 nights in October, tickets to events, and a wire transfer of $22,000 to a company called VC Interiors. Marcus had tracked the company. It was an interior design firm. Listed owner, Vanessa Cooper. Robert had paid his girlfriend's company $22,000 out of what he'd called his personal inheritance. Let me give you a simple summary, because at this point it was getting complicated. Robert received $2.3 million. Within the first month, he mixed it with joint accounts, transferred $340,000 to a private account, spent $60,000 on jewelry, paid $22,000 to his girlfriend's business, and spent additional money on trips and hotel suites. Total spent on Vanessa and her business, approximately $127,000. That's called dissipation of marital assets. That's a term that means something very specific in court. That should have been my first warning that Robert had never actually understood consequences. He'd lived his whole life as a man who did what he wanted because I kept things running. I paid the bills, I scheduled things, I kept track. He'd coasted on my organization for 4 decades and never had to face the results of his own carelessness. Now he was about to. Rebecca sent a formal demand letter to Hartman. She laid out the commingling evidence, the dissipation figures, and the deposition she intended to take from Vanessa Cooper directly. Hartman responded within hours. He called Rebecca's office and left a message saying his client was prepared to offer $500,000. Final offer. Rebecca called me and told me, $500,000, up from $300,000, up from $10,000. I thought about it for exactly 2 minutes. No, I said, we go to trial. Rebecca was quiet a moment. It's going to be hard, Marion. You'll have to testify, so will Jessica. Robert's attorney will try to paint you as bitter and unreasonable. I know. Are you sure? I thought about the couch, the bracelet, the photo on Instagram. The text message I'd gotten while folding his laundry. I've been reasonable for 42 years, I said. I'm done. We set a trial date. Over the following weeks, Rebecca prepared everything. Bank statements going back 7 years, tax returns, the 2003 deed transfer with full documentation, Marcus's complete report on the private account and the $127,000 in expenditures, the Instagram screenshots, the jewelry receipt, the wire transfer to Vanessa's company, the voicemail from Linda, the recording of the conversation at Jessica's door. She also prepared me. We did mock questioning. Hartman would try to make me look like a woman who hadn't contributed financially to the marriage. Rebecca needed me to be specific, calm, and clear about every way I had contributed over 42 years. I could do that. I had a very good memory. The trial was 3 weeks out. I joined a support group in that time, a women's divorce group that met Tuesday evenings at a community center in Midtown. I almost didn't go. I thought it might feel small compared to what I was going through. It didn't feel small, it felt necessary. There were 7 women in the group when I started, different ages, different situations, but the same core thing, that sense of having been erased, of having been told that everything you'd given wasn't worth much. I told my story once, briefly, in my second session. When I was done, there was a silence. Then a woman named Diane, who was in her late 50s and had been through her own complicated divorce 4 years prior, said, "You know what you are? You're not a victim. You're a witness. You saw exactly what happened. Now you get to say it out loud." I thought about that a lot over the following weeks. Then the night before the trial started, I got one more call. Not from Robert, not from Linda, from Vanessa. I almost didn't pick up. I didn't recognize the number. But something made me answer. Her voice was careful, measured. I just want you to know I had no idea things were this complicated. He told me the two of you had been separated for years. I let that sit in the air for a moment. He told you we were separated? Yes, he said. Vanessa, I was folding his laundry when he texted me to leave. We shared a bedroom, a bathroom, a kitchen for 42 years. There was no separation. She was quiet. I'm sorry, she finally said. It sounded genuine. I don't know if it was. Save it for your deposition, I said, and I hung up. I sat in the quiet of my kitchen, my house, the house that had been in my name since 2003. The house Robert had told me to pack my things and leave. The trial started tomorrow. I was ready. The courtroom was smaller than I expected. Judge Morrison's courtroom, Department 17 of the Sacramento Superior Court. Dark wood paneling, fluorescent lights, rows of seats behind the low partition. Jessica sat in the second row. She'd worn a blazer. She looked like me when I was 40. Robert was already at his table when Rebecca and I walked in. He was wearing one of his new suits. The expensive ones. Hartman sat next to him, arranging papers. Robert didn't look up. I sat down and put my hands flat on the table. Rebecca leaned over and said quietly, "Stay calm, stay direct, don't explain anything I don't ask you to explain." I nodded. I knew. Hartman went first. He was smooth. He always was. He told the judge that Robert Chen was a man who had responsibly managed a private inheritance, that Marion Chen had not worked outside the home for over a decade, that her financial contributions to the marriage had been minimal in recent years, that the inheritance from Uncle Lawrence was clearly, legally, the separate property of Robert Chen and should be protected as such. He used the words reasonable and fair a lot. I noticed that. People who are trying to be unreasonable always use those words. Rebecca stood up. She had a binder. She put it on the lectern and opened it to the first tab. She said, "Your Honor, will be presenting evidence today showing three things. First, that the inheritance was commingled with joint marital assets within the first week of receipt, destroying its protected status. Second, that Mr. Chen dissipated approximately $127,000 of those assets on a third party. And third, that the marital home at 1847 Maple Drive has been solely titled in Mrs. Chen's name since 2003, removing it entirely from this dispute." Hartman objected. Morrison overruled him. Rebecca kept going. That should have been Robert's first warning. It wasn't. Rebecca presented the bank records first. Page by page, transaction by transaction. The judge had physical copies. She walked through each one clearly. The inheritance received. The joint account activity in the first week. A bill paid from a shared account. A transfer back. A small one, but it didn't matter. Even one commingling transaction was enough. Hartman tried to argue the transactions were inadvertent, that Robert had moved money around for administrative purposes. Rebecca asked him to define administrative purposes when it came to a $60,000 jewelry purchase. The judge looked at Hartman over her glasses. He had no good answer. Rebecca moved to the dissipation evidence, the jewelry receipt, the wire transfer to Vanessa's interior design company, the hotel receipts from San Francisco, the dinners, the suits. She laid it out item by item. Total, $127,000. Spent by Robert Chen on Vanessa Cooper within the first 60 days of receiving the inheritance. You want to know what that number felt like when Rebecca said it out loud in that courtroom? $127,000, spent in 60 days, on a woman he'd introduced to me in my own kitchen. I sat very still and let it land. Then it was Robert's turn to testify. Hartman walked him through his version of events. Robert spoke carefully, measured. He said he'd been unhappy in the marriage for years. He said Marion and he had grown apart. He said the inheritance had given him the financial ability to make a change he should have made sooner. He said the money he'd spent was his own personal money, responsibly managed. He looked confident up there. He'd always been a confident man. It had been one of the things I loved about him when we were young. Big mistake. Confidence without preparation. Rebecca stood for cross-examination. She asked him about the bank transactions. He admitted them. He said they were minor, administrative. She asked him about the jewelry. He admitted the purchase. He said it was a personal gift. She asked him about the wire transfer to Vanessa Cooper's interior design company. He paused. He said he'd hired her firm for consulting work. What consulting work? Rebecca asked. He said it was related to potential property renovations. At what property? Rebecca asked. He hesitated. A property I was considering purchasing. And did you purchase that property? Pause. No. So you paid $22,000 to your girlfriend's company for consulting on a property you never bought and no longer intend to buy. Hartman objected, argumentative. Morrison sustained it, but it didn't matter. The question was out. I watched Robert on the stand. He was holding it together, but his jaw was tight. I'd lived with that jaw for 42 years. That jaw meant he was furious and trying not to show it. Then Vanessa took the stand. She dressed carefully, conservative blouse, simple earrings. She was trying to look like someone with nothing to hide. She'd been coached. Hartman asked her a few soft questions. She said she and Robert had been dating for 8 months. She said she had no idea about the details of his marriage. She said she regretted causing pain to anyone. Rebecca stood up. She asked Vanessa about the Instagram post, the photo from my living room. Vanessa said she didn't recall posting it. Rebecca showed her the screenshot with the timestamp. Vanessa said maybe she'd visited the house once, she didn't remember exactly. You don't remember being in Marion Chen's home? Rebecca asked. I may have been there briefly, Vanessa said. Robert invited me. While Marion Chen was still living there. Pause, I don't know when she moved out. Mrs. Chen never moved out, Rebecca said. She lives there now. Another pause. Hartman started to object, but Vanessa was already talking again, trying to recover. Rebecca cut her off. She picked up a printed document and read from it directly. A text message, dated 6 weeks before Uncle Lawrence died, sent from Vanessa's number to Robert's. Once you get that money, we can finally be together, Rebecca read. That's what you wrote, correct? The room went very quiet. Vanessa looked at her lawyer. Hartman looked at Hartman's notes. Robert looked at the table. I don't remember writing that, Vanessa said. The records show you did, Rebecca said. So let me ask this simply. Were you aware before Uncle Lawrence died that Robert expected to receive a significant inheritance? Long pause. He may have mentioned it, Vanessa said. He may have mentioned it, Rebecca repeated. She let that sit in the room for a moment. Then she said, no further questions. I looked at Robert when Rebecca sat down. His face was completely still. The way it had been the day of the judge's first ruling. That stillness that meant everything was cracking underneath. This whole time I'd wondered if he'd loved her. If it had been something real that just happened and grew into what it became. But that text message changed the math. She'd known about the inheritance before it came through. She'd been waiting. They'd both been waiting. So let me get this straight. My husband had been planning to leave me. He'd been waiting for the right financial moment. He'd found someone to leave me for, and she'd been timing it too. I had been the last to know everything. Looking back, I don't know how I didn't see it earlier. The distance. The small absences. The way he stopped asking about my day. I told myself it was just aging, just the natural drift of long marriage, but it wasn't drift. It was intentional. That was the hardest part of that day, not the courtroom, not Vanessa on the stand. The hardest part was realizing it had been a choice, not a mistake, not an accident, a deliberate decision made over months, maybe years, while I folded laundry and tended my garden and taught myself to bake bread during the pandemic and thought we were fine. We were not fine, but neither was he. Not anymore. Rebecca's closing argument was precise. She walked the judge through the commingling evidence, the dissipation total, the deed transfer, and the text message. She said Robert Chen had received a significant inheritance, immediately mixed it with marital assets, spent $127,000 of it on a relationship he'd cultivated while still married, and then attempted to push his wife of 42 years out of her own legally titled home with a check for $10,000. The respondent, Rebecca said, taught children in Sacramento schools for 31 years. She raised 2 children in the home at 1847 Maple Drive. She managed the household finances and infrastructure of this marriage for 4 decades. She is not asking for more than she's owed. She is asking for exactly what 42 years of partnership entitles her to. Hartman gave his closing. He was still smooth, still talking about separate property and reasonable settlements and the importance of respecting financial autonomy. Judge Morrison listened to both of them with the same expression. Slightly tired, slightly sharp. Then she said, "I'll have my ruling in 3 days." 3 days felt like 3 years. I went home that evening. I sat in the kitchen for a long time. Jessica had offered to stay, but I'd said no. I needed to be alone in the house. My house, I made tea, I sat with it until it went cold. Then I went to bed and I actually slept. Full night, the first time in weeks. I didn't dream about Robert. I didn't dream about the courtroom. I dreamed about Italy. I'd always wanted to go. Robert had always said someday we'd get to Italy. Someday had never come. I woke up thinking about the Amalfi Coast, about small restaurants on hillsides, about wine in the afternoon with nobody I had to explain myself to. 3 days later, Judge Morrison read her ruling. Robert Chen's shoulders dropped when she started speaking. I watched them fall, just slightly. But I'd been watching those shoulders for 42 years. I knew what it meant. She declared the entire inheritance community property due to commingling. She awarded me the house at 1847 Maple Drive outright. She divided the 401k evenly. She awarded me $186,500 from the inheritance, my equal share after accounting for the waste deduction. She awarded me the full $127,000 as a dissipation penalty against Robert. She set permanent spousal support at $3,000 per month, and she ordered Robert to pay all attorney's fees. Hartman was on his feet immediately. Morrison looked at him calmly and said, "Counsel, your client had extensive opportunity to settle this matter fairly at multiple points. He chose not to. The record reflects that choice." She closed her folder. I sat still in my chair. Rebecca put her hand on my arm. $2.3 million, 42 years. A text message that said, "Pack your things and get out." The judge had read all of it and decided what it was worth. She'd gotten it right. I walked out of that courthouse into the November sun. Jessica was right behind me. She grabbed my arm as soon as we hit the sidewalk. We didn't say anything for a moment. We just stood there on the steps while the city moved around us. Cars, people, pigeons on the railing. Then Jessica said, "Italy." "Italy," I said. We looked at each other and she laughed. Real laugh, full one. The kind I hadn't heard from her in weeks. Rebecca came out behind us and shook both our hands. She said she'd be in touch about the financial transfers and the formal paperwork. She said it might take a few weeks to fully process. I told her that was fine. I wasn't going anywhere. I was, in fact, already home. That should have been the end of it. It mostly was. But there were still consequences to watch land. And I watched every single one. Robert had 60 days to vacate the marital home and transfer ownership back into my sole name. He'd already been living somewhere else since the judge's first ruling. He rented a 2-bedroom condo in Rancho Cordova, small building, parking lot view. I heard about it from Jessica, who heard about it from our son Daniel, who'd driven past it once and told her. I didn't feel satisfaction about the condo. That surprised me. I thought I would. But it just felt sad, not for him, for the waste of it. A man at 69 with $2.3 million could have retired beautifully. Could have traveled, could have done anything. Instead, he'd burned more than half of it on legal fees, settlements, and a bracelet for a woman who hadn't been waiting for him. She'd been waiting for the money. Speaking of Vanessa, she and Robert lasted 4 months after the ruling. I don't know all the details. I didn't go looking. But Jessica mentioned it in passing one night over dinner. She said Daniel had heard through someone who knew someone that Vanessa had moved out of Robert's condo in March. I thought about the text she'd sent him. "Once you get that money, we can finally be together." They were together, until the money was significantly reduced. Then they were not. Big mistake. His, hers, both of theirs. I don't know where Vanessa is now. I don't think about her much. She wasn't the real problem. She was a symptom of a problem that had been building for years, a man who felt unseen in his own life and looked for the solution in entirely the wrong place. I booked Italy in January. 2 weeks. Milan, Florence, the Amalfi Coast. Solo trip. First time I'd traveled alone in 40 years. The travel agent asked if I was sure I didn't want a tour group. I said I was very sure. I walked through the Uffizi alone and stood in front of Botticelli paintings for as long as I wanted. I ate dinner at a small table in Florence with a glass of wine and a book. I sat on a terrace in Positano and watched the boats on the water and felt the warm air and thought about almost nothing at all. One afternoon, I hiked the Path of the Gods above Amalfi. It was steep. My legs ached. But I made it to the top, and the view from there, the sea spread out below me, the terraced hills, the small white buildings, it was one of the most beautiful things I've ever seen. Looking back, that moment was the real end of my marriage. Not the text, not the papers, not the ruling. That moment on the hillside, alone, completely at peace with no one to answer to, that's when I knew I was going to be fine. I came home to my house in April. The garden had survived the winter reasonably well. I spent the first weekend back planting, new roses along the back fence, herbs near the kitchen window. The garden Robert had always said he'd fix up but never did. I fixed it up. Took me 3 weekends, looked exactly how I'd always wanted it to look. My book club started meeting at my house in the spring. 6 women. We'd been a group for 12 years but had always met at the library. Now we met in my living room. The living room with the couch from the Instagram photo. I'd had it reupholstered, new fabric, completely different. I also started painting. Watercolors mostly. I'd taken a class years ago and always meant to go back. I signed up for a Thursday morning studio class at a community arts center downtown. The instructor was a retired professor named George who'd spent decades teaching art history at Sacramento State. He was funny, dry humor. He didn't sugarcoat bad work. He told me my first painting looked like a weather map, which was true. My second one was better. He said so. We started having coffee after class. I want to be clear about something. I wasn't looking for anyone. I wasn't trying to replace anything. I was 67 years old and I had just finished 42 years of marriage and a 6-month legal battle and a solo trip to Italy. The last thing on my mind was starting something new, but George made me laugh, not the polite kind, the real kind. We talked about books, about travel, about what it meant to spend a life doing work you believed in. He'd been widowed 5 years earlier. He understood what it meant to rebuild. We had dinner in June. Just the two of us, a restaurant downtown. He wore a decent jacket, and I wore the blue dress I'd bought in Florence, and we talked for 3 hours. I got home that night and sat on my patio with a glass of wine. I thought about the text message, the one I'd received while folding laundry on a Tuesday afternoon, the one that had seemed in that moment like the end of everything. I just inherited millions. Pack your things and get out. 7 words that were supposed to erase me, supposed to make me take $10,000 and disappear. Supposed to reduce 42 years to nothing. Instead, they started something. They started me paying attention. They started a process that uncovered every hidden thing and laid it in front of a judge. They started a chain of events that ended with me sitting on my patio in the evening air, in my house, in my garden, with my wine, planning a second dinner with a man who made me laugh. Robert's text was supposed to be his freedom. It turned out to be mine. Here's what I learned. And I'm not going to make this a lecture because you don't need one, but here it is, simple as I can say it. You can share a life with someone for 42 years and still not know what they think you're worth. That's not a failure. That's information. And when you finally get that information, even if it comes in a 7-word text while you're holding a warm shirt, you have a choice. You can crumble, or you can find out exactly what you're worth on your own terms. I found out. I'm worth quite a lot, it turns out. The judge agreed. So the question I keep thinking about is this. When Robert sent that text, he thought he knew exactly how I'd respond. He'd been watching me for 42 years. He was completely certain. What made him so sure I'd just fold? And if you were in my position, what would you have done differently? If you enjoyed this story, hit like and subscribe. And we'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments.